Good afternoon, my name is Tumi Tladi. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is going to be session number 3 or video number 3 that I'm doing right now, where we're going to be focusing on contracts. This whole thing that you see here, it's for web API series that I'm currently doing. So in our previous session or video, we did cover response type, particularly looking at JSON. And then in this video, we're going to be looking at contracts. Now, you won't hear about contracts. Maybe, let's do a Google research. Web API contracts. Let's hear what they have to say. And I'll tell you why I'm keen to want to know if there's somebody covering contracts in Web API. What is this? This is not contract. What is API contract? Oh, this should be interesting. And then Web API design best practices. Let's see what they have to say. Why are they saying API contract, not Web API? Okay, so let's see. What is an API contract? How is an API contract useful to the development process? When building and consuming APIs, you will often hear of a contract. What is it? Basically, an API contract is a document that describes how the API works. Yep, that's it. But it's important to know that it's also an agreement from API developers that the product they put out works. No, this is not what I'm looking for. Absolutely, it's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, no, it is what I'm looking for. Yes, no, it is what I'm looking for. Wait. It's also an agreement from API developers that the product they put out works how they say it does. Any changes to the API should be reflected in the contract, otherwise anyone who consumes it will not be aware. Aha, yes, I believe it is what I'm looking for. An API contract is a documentation that describes how the API works and how it should be used. Okay, why is an API contract needed? When making changes to an API, those changes should be communicated out and documented to avoid unexpected behavior from clients that consumes it. This is perfect. Now, in this case of identical docs, the client that consumes this API is a Xamarin application. Also, WPF application. Where is it? WPF application, right? Cool. So that's the client. Imagine you have an app that depends on some data from an API. Let's say the API developers decide to rename a field or type of response. Your client application will break, right? An API versioning, you see, I've been saying all along that Web API is a versioned system. An API versioning is a tactic for making breaking changes to an API. For example, the API endpoint, you see, they are called endpoints. This one, okay, we know this is a domain, and this is the API, and then there's the version number 2, and this is the endpoint. Represented that this API is on version number 2, this also allows us to assume there is a version 1. Clients can continue to use version 1 and does not have the app break. Newer functionality can be developed on version 2 or version 3. That's exactly what I have currently in my system. I'm glad. If you look at this document that I'm still busy with, even like today, I started the V3 system. As you can see from the 13th Friday, which is last week, I started. Everything is V3. API routes V3. Everything's V3. Every day I've been building until today. You know, I've been V3 because it's a versioned system. I'm glad. So that's a contract. This is a perfect thing. Yeah, we are done. What do you say? Obviously, Microsoft has to be complicated. Obviously, Microsoft has to be complicated. So we are done. I love this definition. I really love it. An API versioning is a tactic for making breaking changes, like I am doing right now for security purposes on v3. For example, the API endpoint, this one, represents that this API is on version number 2, and then that's exactly what I have. This also allows us to assume there is a version 1. Clients can continue to use version 1 and does not have the app break. Newer functionality can be developed on version 2 and version 3. I love this. We are done with this video, but practically so. So I have a folder called contracts, but I want to explain this folder first. The way I understand it. For both .NET Framework and .NET Core, there is a folder called contracts, and I want to open this one and this one. So ask yourself, why is there a folder called Web API on .NET Framework? It's because this is 2-in-1. There's also MVC. So everything I do, I have to separate it that, hey, this is MVC controllers and these are Web API controllers. By the way, we're going to be covering those controllers in our next session. Okay, so, and then look what we have. We have V1, V2, V3. I was busy with the V3, I think, yesterday. And if you look at this .NET Core, because usually when I do Web API, I start with .NET Framework version, I test it. If it works, then I go to .NET Core version of it. So currently I have a V1, V2. This is a versioned system, but let me show you something about this system. Usually other people, how they do it, even Microsoft in their earlier templates, they screwed up, okay, especially in .NET Framework. What they will do, they will give you a border template for Web API, ASP.NET Web API project, and then they will give you some models, and even some of them are called view models, but not only Microsoft. Other developers, back in the day, a couple of years ago, what they will do, they will insist on, okay, you can have the model adopting MVVM pattern, design pattern, right? They would have the controllers, they would have the models, and they will have a view models, right? That's MVVM, right? Cool. But here's the problem. Now, in Web API industry or world, we don't use view models. These view models are meant for MVC, and these ones are still, well, I'm still making use of some for Web API. That's why they're not inside the folder MVC. And I'll try to explain this when I get to dependency injection, because I remember exactly what I did there. When I get to dependency injection, I'll probably remember. I'll try to remember to explain why these two classes are outside this folder and why there's no folder called Web API, because ASP.NET Web API, it doesn't make use of view models. Instead, it's making use of contracts. Now, the contract is not just a V1, V2, V3. That's not it. It's all about the response and request. Okay, so if you look at V1, there's a folder called request and response, and I'm going to focus on this one. Also, let's go to V1.NET Core. There's a request and response, but there's another class called API route V1. The same thing here, and I want to start to open this class for you to understand why we have folders request and response. Okay, so I don't know if you noticed that they have this API, right? So this is a default. We know this is a domain, right? It can be localhost : and port number, but there is this API, right? So now I extract that to have a global class called API route with the base. So that API that you see, for security reasons, you don't have to rename it. You don't have to leave it as API for security reasons, because it's easily breakable. Rather name it something, like in my case, it's identical docs API, and I know this. Even when I use Swagger or Postman, I know this is identical docs API. Okay, and let me show, by the way, something. If we look at my API.identicalDocs project, this is for .NET Core. Okay, this is for .NET Core. Okay, I want to show you something. So this is the domain that we're looking at here. This is the domain. And now this class called API routes underscore for V1. And I want you to note something. There's also for V2. Here it is. There's also for V3. And here it is. Because of what we just read here, that this it's a tactic for breaking changes to an API. You want to make sure that the client can continue to use V1 without having the app to break, or any client connected to the API endpoint, break. That's the whole purpose. So in this case, this is how it's gonna be: identical docs API. I know it by head. This is the API. I had to rename it for security reasons, and that's a pro tip: rename it. The second thing after this is gonna be the version. I also have it as V1. There is V1. There is V2. Currently I'm busy with the V3, according to what we see right here. And then lastly, then we have the actual endpoint. In this case, it's gonna be. Are we looking at feedbacks? Let's continue to use that feedbacks. You see feedbacks, but in that case, it's gonna be this guy. In this case, this is how it's gonna be. This is a fully fledged endpoint. So for security reason, I'm attaching something that if you want to make use of this, you should in fact provide some mechanism to authenticate yourself. So that's a V3. That's why I'm doing V3 to protect this. But V1 and V2, the clients can still continue to use this. But once you get hold of my app on Google Play Store, it's gonna have a V3. So that means the app will have to authenticate itself. That's the whole purpose. So this is why this class, it's a global class with the base and the version. As you can see, the base / and the version, which is V1 / and the name of the endpoint. I hope this makes sense. Then when we go, let's do the same thing for .NET Core. So you see that I'm not cheating. So this .NET Core, it's the same class. Nothing is different. Nothing. Then let's go now to that endpoint. Web API V1 general feedbacks, where we're getting all the feedbacks. Now, okay, let's give this guy a second before it becomes unresponsive. Okay. I also want to bring this one. V1 general feedbacks for .NET Core, and I'm going to do side by side, but I want this guy beneath. Cool. So we're gonna focus on this endpoint. Also gonna focus on this endpoint for .NET Core, right? Cool. Now here's the thing. We learned about in the video number 1, HTTP verbs, get, post, put, and delete, right? And then the second video we learned about response type with JSON, right? So we have the attribute, and then we have the response type, and now we have the route. So this is where the route comes in. Now place an action to expose it directly via a route, right? So route, we are saying go to that class API route V1, the one we just opened. Go and look for the feedback. It's a static class, and go and get all feedbacks. And now look at this. It's a constant, not a static, rather, sorry. It's a constant string, right? It's a constant variable. So this is what it says. It says we need the base / version number, and then this guy. That's what you see here, and that's exactly what you get here. Okay. So it's the same thing when it comes to .NET Core. Like I said, with .NET Core, the difference is now they made the route to be the same, in the same line of the verb or the method, HTTP verb and HTTP method, because it takes in something. Cool. So this is how it is. That's the first thing that you do. The second thing, if you look at this, the response type. Let's look at the response type. Now, the response type is that it returns a list. Yes, type of a list of. Look at this. Get all. What do you see? Get all, right? So for me. This is for me. I'm saying this is get. This is me. Get. This is the verb. I'm getting all, and there are cases where I'm getting one, and I'll show you from this list. Where you see get one business, post one audio, post one uploads, get all feedbacks, post one feedback, post one access pin, get all notifications. This is how I do it for myself. So I'm saying this is going to be forget. You're getting all the feedbacks, but this is going to be the response for version 1. Do you see that? The same thing here, that now the response type on .NET Core, as we are making use of this attribute, produce response type with the status code 200, type of list, get all feedbacks response for v1. So what is this response that we're talking about? That's the question, right? I'm glad you asked. So let me open this one here. So we have the request, but we also have, let me close the controls before it confuses me. Same thing for this guy, we close the controllers so it doesn't confuse. Okay, so when you go to, we don't want the response yet, let's go to responses, general, and then as you can see that there is this get all feedbacks response for v1. It's a class. I want this one to go upstairs. Now for the .NET Core, we want to get to responses. Look at the consistency in my system, the folder names, where everything is properly organized. I'm gonna go to general, and then see, okay, we need this, we need here, get all feedbacks response v1. If you want to know which one is .NET Framework, which one is .NET Core, look at these icons. This will help you in every class I open. If you can see with this icon, this is .NET Framework. If you can see with this icon and then the name, this .NET Core. Okay, everything's the same. Now, this is what I do. Instead of the view models, we are making use of requests and responses. The request is what's coming in, and the response is what's going out. So I'm saying I'm gonna return this to you. Okay, this is the class. It only has attributes. We don't need other attributes on the properties. Sorry, this is the class. It has all the properties. We don't need attributes on the properties. I have title, message, rating, when was it created, and then by whom. This is it. The same thing. Title, message, rating, created on, and then who created that feedback. But let's look at something that's interesting. Let's look at let's bring this guy down here so that everything makes sense. There we go. Now let's go for .NET Framework. Look at the feedbacks again, but for post one feedback, right? The same thing this side. Post one feedback. I want you to notice everything, and we're gonna go now to the controller, where this time we are focusing on the second endpoint, and controller we are focusing on the second endpoint, which is this guy. So we are saying this is HTTP post, and this is HTTP post. The route is going to API routes underscore v1 class. You look, you find a class called feedbacks. Then look for this constant variable post one feedback. The same thing, route feedback post one feedback, right? Now, but look at something what it takes in. This one takes in post. Do you see? I'm sure by now you know how smart I am as a developer. So this is post verb or HTTP method. I'm posting one. That means one user at a time can post one feedback, and this is a request for v1 contract. The same thing, post one feedback request v1. And this is a variable name for this object. Now we need to look at this. So we are done. Let's go first with .NET Framework. This side, we need to close the response and go to request, general. You see a class called the post one feedback request for v1. I want you to open that side. Let's close it. And then this side, let's close the responses, and we're gonna open here the request post one feedback. Now this is where it gets to be interesting, because I'm still gonna be doing there's a video I scheduled to do for validators. Okay, making use of a Fluent validation, please watch a video. It's called Service Provider for Fluent Validation. Okay. Now, for .NET Framework, I'll come to this line in a second, this attribute in a second. So there's a normal class. It has the same properties. Do you see that we are breaking down this confused view model in Web API? We don't need a view model in Web API. We need the request and the responses. I'll show you why. Now look at this. We are saying, give us the title. It's a must from the Xamarin application or from the WPF application. Give us the message of your feedback. It's a must, right? Now give us the rating of type integer 1 to 5. It's a must. And then who are you? And it's a must. Do you see there's something that's missing here? There is one property that's missing. I'll come to it. The same thing with .NET Core class. Give us everything which is a must. Still, there's something that's missing which is created on property. How do I know that? Let's look at the response. The response has this created on. And we'll talk about this at a later stage when we get to controllers. Particularly for feedbacks. When we get to feedbacks video at a later stage. Okay, also when we look at it, there's a response that is created on, because you don't have to ask the user when did you create or when are you creating this feedback. You just let the Web API to handle that by default. In fact, it's not a Web API handling this by default, but we'll take a look at it when we get to feedbacks. So this is the response that's coming in. That's it. That's it. This is the version system. These are the contracts. Everything is V1, V2, V3. Everything has a request and response. And with, in my case, accompanying class API routes, all my systems right now, I'm building a new system called C versus C. It's going to use the same pattern for Web API. And this is how you build a successful Web API. Everything, even now the V3 that I've just introduced, I have all of them. The cache is that there's a V3. Let's go to post one feedback. You see, it's a V3. It's V3. Oh, now let me explain something that I want to explain. So we're done here. So let me explain something that's different here on the request. There's no attribute called validators, right? Because this is how you are saying on .NET Framework, making use of a Fluent validation NuGet package. I have a video on it where I showed how it works for validation, where I'm validating this. In .NET Framework, you just need to use this attribute called validator. As you can see, it's coming from Fluent validation attributes, right? Now, it takes in type of that validator, but we'll get to it at a later stage. Just know that this is how you marking this request to be validated by Fluent validator. In .NET Core, it's handled differently because .NET Core is now more smarter than .NET Framework. But this is how you would do it. And this is to prove that I know my system in and out. Okay, so let's close everything. We learned a lot about contracts. The last video I'm going to do for this session is going to be contracts. Please stay tuned for that one. For now, thank you very much for being patient with me. I know my English runs out of airtime. I talk fast, and I know that's me. I tried to stop multiple times. I even went to see a therapist. I'm like, but this is me. I'm passionate. When I'm passionate, I go nuts. If you like this video, the material, leave a comment if you have any. Leave your suggestion if you have any. Leave any question you might have. Subscribe and tell your fellow developers about the goodness of this YouTube channel. Share this video, and finally click on the notification bell to be notified when I drop the videos. This is good stuff. This is juicy stuff. With that being said, until next time.